Hey there everybody, it's AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time thanks to your generous support, shares and views, with multiple uploads every week to help share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. The Ankheg is a monstrously large, aggressive and predatory insect created by Errol Otis, who submitted the first artwork and write-up of them to the editors of Dragon magazine, or well, it was called The Dragon back in 1977, and the Creature Features column includes the first depiction of the Ankheg in issue number 5. Errol went on to work for TSR. He was a prolific contributor, creating full covers as well as many interior illustrations for TSR materials. For example, he created the cover for the first version of the D&D manual Deities and Demigods, and he illustrated the Cthulhu pantheon within those pages. He was, and I dare say still is, one hell of a dungeon master. While working at TSR, he was a runner-up in TSR's 4th Invitational AD&D Masters Tournament at Gen Con 13, a contest to choose the game's best overall dungeon master. He competed against the likes of Leonard Lakofka, and the first place was taken out by Frank Mensa. Of course, Mensa is a wizard. If you ever run or play in the adventure module The Dungeons of the Slave Lords, boy, they don't name them like that anymore, you might find a treasure in the form of a series of paintings by the famous drow artist Ul Urtz, which is Errol Otis with the letters mixed up in an anagram. They loved doing that back in the early days. Ankhegs are arthropods, so they have a segmented body and paired limbs with joints. No internal skeleton or spine. They look like huge insects, but share some of the traits of arachnids, myriapods, which is centipedes, millipedes, trilobites, and crustaceans, as well as insects in general. They are fantastical, monstrous creatures, far larger than any insect on Earth has ever been. Also, trilobites all went extinct on Earth hundreds of millions of years ago, so really who knows what they might have evolved into eventually, even without a world that includes creatures of magic and elemental power and undead and so on. As a monster, there are a few key features of the Ankheg that make it a classic and enduring favourite. They've appeared in every single edition of the game. First, they're just giant bugs. They're not intelligent foes. They behave exactly, highly predictably. If one knows how they react to a certain situation, they can be relied on to react the same way every time. They are burrowing, ambush predators who attack with the intent of eating their prey, or providing a ready source of protein to their offspring when they hatch from their eggs. They spit acid, but they're not immune to acid, and they tend to latch onto their prey and chew it in half. Finally, they are highly destructive to farmland, which makes them the bane of crop and livestock growers, particularly halflings and humans. Like most insects, they hatch from eggs, exist in a larval form, then they pupate and hatch from their cocoon in a nymph juvenile, then growing and shedding their exoskeleton until they reach full adult size. In their adult form, they have 6 legs and a many-segmented body, all covered in a brown or orange and dark yellow thick chitinous exoskeleton. This hard material can be harvested by the knowledgeable or the brave and foolhardy to be used as a natural armour. There are no stats or lore for this in the current monster manual, so I'll provide for you that in just a moment. Their heads have black compound eyes, almost insect, quite advanced for an insect, able to see 60 feet even in darkness, but the main way they detect the environment is through their very sensitive bristles that are located all over their body that sense motion and vibration, and this is reflected in their tremor sense. Also with a range of 60 feet, able to feel the motion of animals across the ground above them, primarily, just before they burst out and attack, but also quite effective underground in the unstable burrows that they create. With large, extremely powerful mandibles capable of snapping through tree roots and the trunks of saplings, also the armour-clad leg or torso of a humanoid, they have a digestive system capable of consuming all sorts of material, even gaining some nutrients from eating the rich soil in the vegetated environments that they prefer, such as grasslands and forests. They do not fare well in deserts, parched, arid environments, or in soggy, waterlogged swamps and moors, so they have a fairly well-defined sort of place where they most frequently are encountered. They do have antennae, often very well protected and tucked back into grooves in the heavy exoskeletal head armour, and that are kind of hard to see or to damage usually. They have sensitive palps around the mouth parts, also the joints and the slightly more flexible segments on the underside are the most vulnerable spots. They are intimidatingly large. An adult Ankheg is around 10 feet or 3 meters long and weighs around 800 pounds or 362 kilograms. They almost always breed in autumn, when a fertilized female larger than the males will kill the male she mated with unless the male has provided a sufficiently large larder of corpses to provide all the protein her offspring will require. Ankhegs have no problem devouring decaying meat, so the nest is typically a fairly gruesome affair, with the female laying between 6 and 12 eggs inside the male or whatever other body she is using. The eggs are they're only about the size of an elongated baseball. They're dark brown, almost a black, with a slick, waxy feel to them and a very unpleasant smell. Some say it smells like very bad rotting fruit. Usually a high number of eggs survive and hatch within 2 to 10 days, immediately eating the shell and then burrowing into the corpse that they were laid in. Broodlings, as they are called, these big maggots, don't hunt for themselves. They stay hidden and quickly consume their initial store of protein, which is then supplemented by the mother, who will voraciously hunt the area for any animals that she can catch, kill, and drag back to her brood. They will hunt, they'll grow for a full year inside the burrow, and aside from a hibernation chamber, this is the most robust underground structure the Ankheg will ever actually construct. Even so, it's just a tunnel, about 60 feet to 150 feet long, 5 feet high, and always about 40 feet under the ground. They typically use the ends of these tunnels as sleeping, brooding, or hibernation nests. Even during the first year, the broodling is capable of defending itself, although they only have an armor class of 11 and a movement speed of no more than 5 feet per round, and only their tremor sense out to 30 feet. They do have a formidable bite that does 1d6 piercing and 1d6 acid damage. The broodlings never spit the acid, as with the adults. It's actually their digestive acid, and the broodlings are just as vulnerable to it as the adults are. Plus, if they spit that, they can't digest their food, and eating is the sole purpose of a broodling. Within a few months of the broodling goes through a short pupa stage. They swell up a bit. They slowly burrow their way into the tunnel floor or the wall and become very torpid, and then they harden and into a rigid cocoon, which darkens, undergoing this transformation into their juvenile form, which is quite similar to their adult form. They hatch a few months later. Around the second year, the juvenile, now known as a nymph, will shed its exoskeleton just before winter. Over the course of 10 days, it will again become quite sluggish. Then it swells internally and it pushes its way out of a crack in its back of its old exoskeleton, remaining quite vulnerable and very pale until the new chitin hardens and darkens into its adult colours. During this molting stage, it secretes quite a lot of that fluid that smells very much like rotten fruit. Presumably this served some vital purpose in the past, but it is a bit baffling, as the smell can be easily detected by predators who have a taste for juvenile Ankheg, such as behirs, basilisks, bullaes, just a list of the large predators available in Dungeons and Dragons. That was just starting with the letter B. There's tons of them. As they will make a beeline, the bee monsters, to such a large meal. Luckily, there will still be a huge female around to protect her offspring even at this stage. With 6 to 12 offspring, though, the drain on the supply of animal life in the area around the nest is quite severe, so some predation on juveniles is not a huge loss and may actually benefit those that survive. This factors very strongly in favour of the Ankhegs seeking out areas that are very rich in animal life, where the soil is suitable for their burrows, and there are alternative sources of nourishment to tide them over between the intense requirements of breeding. Dense forest is not ideal, as the animal life is not easy to reach for the ground-based Ankheg, so they need glades, waterholes, and of course cleared farmlands near light forests. It's just perfect for them. Particularly if this is farm for livestock, sheep, cattle, pigs, and horses are all top of the list for the hungry mama Ankheg. Rangers will recognise the telltale signs of Ankheg activity right away. The torn up ground and a patch of gore where some beast has burst up from below to attack an animal is either an Ankheg or a boulet. Either one is a pretty serious bad news for the locals in the area. At its best, it will mean that the place is going to be cleared out of deer and wild goats or boar, as they are smart enough to leave the territory of their own accord. But for farmers, this is dire, as they rely on captured animals or concentrated stores of grains and such to survive. And the Ankheg will simply burrow under any defences that they may put in place to safeguard their plants, stores, and animals. It's not easy to get at a creature that has nests 40 feet below the surface. That's a lot of digging. As mentioned, Ankhegs don't create tunnels from the surface down to their nest. They burrow through the ground, and the burrow collapses immediately after they pass through them. It's only by slow and careful digging and compacting that they make a more semi-permanent tunnel, always for a specific purpose and always nearby a rich source of food that they've found. And as I mentioned, it'll be 40 feet below the surface. Once they've located and nested in an area rich in food, they're loath to leave the area until all of that food is gone, so that's quite problematic. Don't feed the Ankhegs. Once these Ankhegs that have moved into colder areas always hibernate during the winter. During these months, they slowly absorb nutrients through the exoskeletal shell and antenna from a festering pile of hoarded meat and other forms of food that they've managed to cobble together. They are insects. They're animals with an intelligence of 1, so they don't really think. They just react to whatever conditions they're in and stimulus that they receive, and they always react the same way to the same thing. So combat with an Ankheg is very predictable. They attack from under the surface, waiting until they feel the tremors of an animal or humanoid passing by, or when they've detected where the animals have gathered to rest, or where the animals move past frequently, such as under or right beside the game trail, or a path to a well, the side of a pond, or the entrance to a farmhouse, or right under the water trough in a farm field. In the case of a field of crops, they burrow right up into the middle, and then they eat around and around in an outward spiralling pattern till all the crops are gone, at which point they'll return to the middle where they've burrowed through, and then they'll go back that way because it's less effort to dig through the soil that they've already loosened. When attacking prey, they single out one target at a time and attempt to grab them in their mandibles, rushing forward and lunging at the prey with brute force, certainly enough to knock a medium-sized humanoid prone unless they've dived out of the way. They don't automatically spray everything with acid. They only do that if they're getting attacked by multiple sources, and they will move to cover as many of those sources of damage as they can with a single spray of acid. They don't want to get caught in the spray themselves, so they don't spray directly over themselves, or spray into an area which they're about to move into. They can't digest anything for up to 6 hours after spraying out their stomach acid, so they do it only as a matter of self-defense. Their primary defense, though, is just burrowing down into the ground. If they don't get murdered in the first round of combat and have taken significant hits during that time, that's exactly what they will do. They're not trying to die, they're trying to catch prey and get away unharmed. So to that end, they leap out of the ground, nab the softest target they can reach first, then try to drag it underground with them, burrowing at a speed of 10 feet per round. They will normally lie in wait 5 to 10 feet under the surface until they spring their surprise attack, so combat will catch the adventurers usually flat-footed, which means they will not have their shield on their arm, or a particularly balmy sunny day they will not be wearing a helmet. The halfling might have no shoes on. These things become kind of important when something is about to spray acid over everybody, so pay attention to the details. At the very least, ask questions like that of the players, and if you do it on the day, it's going to make them highly suspicious, so beware of them metagaming quite a little or a lot depending on the individual. I suggest you ask them these sort of questions on another day in the game, when the conditions of the encounter are almost exactly the same, but they're meeting some agitated local village guards or something. Questions like, are you approaching with helmets on, visors down, shields on your arms, weapons drawn, ready to attack? You will no doubt get a much better idea of the true marching order and style of your player character group, and I bet you will get a very different answer the following day when they're walking over the lair of a waiting Ankheg. But now you can simply say, the group continues through the area the same as they did yesterday, and everyone at the table will just nod. Yep. Job well done, Dungeon Master. It makes it so much easier and better when they're scrambling to protect themselves during the actual fight. You've already predetermined that they don't have their shields ready or their helmets on. They have every reason to fear a 10-foot-long horror cockroach that spits acid and can bite a grown man in half, bursting out of the ground in front of them. Ankhegs are challenge rating 2. But they only have an armor class of 14 and an average of 39 hit points. It's quite low. It's quite reasonable to give them more or less hit points depending on the time of the year and their gender. Females are larger than males. They have much more body mass and vitality at the tail end of summer, just prior to the breeding season. So with a 60, 10 plus 6 hit dice, they have a maximum hit point score of 66. Also, when there is a large female in the area, there will be smaller but much more aggressive males who are desperately trying to catch larger prey to provide a larder for her eggs and possibly save their own lives in the process. they could not be more motivated to kill the player characters, basically. Later in the year, when the broodlings are growing, it is the female who is far more aggressive, and the characters are much more likely to encounter a group of males, but later still, they may only encounter, they're much less likely to encounter that group of males. The males may have been cleared out of the area by the breeding females. Much later, though, they will only encounter a random assortment of barely out of the nest fledgling adults, just out of the nymph stage, with shiny new exoskeletons. Now, you have a very sound, logical reason why there may be more or fewer Ankheg in the encounter, why they may have more hit points, and why one of them may be more like a boss monster compared to the others. It's simple ecology, you understand it quite well. An adult Ankheg bite is +5 to hit, has a range of 5 feet, and does 2d6 plus 3 slashing damage, plus an additional 1d6 acid damage on a hit. If the target is a large or smaller creature, it will be grappled automatically, and needs a roll of 13 or higher to escape, using their strength bonus, as it is a strength check, not a saving throw. Until the grapple is broken, the Ankheg can bite only that target, obviously. However, they will always attack with advantage when doing so. Personally, I think this should be an automatic damage, no additional attack roll required. I mean, the target is already clamped in the vice grip of these deadly mandibles, getting acid spit drooled and frothed over the wounds. It's pretty nasty. I don't see why it has to throw an attack roll every time. I mean, what happens? Does it just fail to bite? They haven't escaped the grapple yet, so why isn't it just automatically doing damage? I ask you, does that seem fair? The Ankheg will spray acid if damaged or facing a large group. This is difficult for them to do more than once per encounter, so you roll a 6-sided die, and at the end of each round, after they've used the spitting acid attack, if the dice rolls a 6, it means they can spit acid again. But be reasonable. It's unlikely that they can do this every round for 4 rounds. Even if you keep rolling 6s, the Ankheg doesn't want to clamber over acid pools on the ground any more than the characters do. And this is not a magical dragon breath. It doesn't just spring out of nowhere. They only have so much acid to spit. The line of acid gouts out in a 5-foot wide, 30-foot long path. That's a lot of acid. It says, provided it has no grappled prey. I mean, at this range, it would undoubtedly splash back and spray acid all over itself at the same time as it hits the target that is grappled in its mandibles, so it doesn't do that. The acid will inflict 3d6 damage on a failed DC 13 dexterity check, but half as much damage if the character manages to get out of the way in time. It kind of splashes anywhere, and that's a lot of acid, and it's quite virulent. Now, I would say that I'd talk about harvesting the exoskeletons to produce wearable armor. So this is the basic rundown. An Ankheg shell harvested from a slain Ankheg weighs 100 pounds. Now I should note that you can actually find the cast-off shells of exoskeletal shells of the nymphs and adults when they cast off their shells over that 10-day period during the year at various points. It takes 3 days to make a suit of armor out of it, and it's very effective. It's nearly as effective as full plate mail, so it's like full plate mail stat-wise, but weighs considerably less. It weighs about half as much, and can be worn by warriors who usually can't wear such heavy armor. So if you're restricted from wearing metal, or it's really up to you. I don't think there's formal rules for it in 5th edition yet, so you might be able to make medium-sized scale mail armor or something like that out of it. A finely crafted suit can sell for up to 20,000 gold pieces, mainly because of the novelty of it, while just selling the shell to a crafting specialist and armorer will net your character around 4,000 gold pieces, which is not bad money for sure. It would certainly propel local farm boys to maybe possibly try and kill an Ankheg in a large group. I mean, 4,000 gold, that's a year's income for all of them. Having dealt with them for so many years, most farmers will know a fair bit about Ankhegs anyway, and will know that Ankhegs can be very beneficial to farmers who use them to burrow around and aerate their soil, which increases the crop yield by up to 15% long term. That's after they've learned what the stimulus of the Ankhegs are, and they've learned how to trigger and lead the Ankhegs around by leaving bait and things like that. So they can actually kind of tame an Ankheg, although you can never actually tame an insect. They don't understand what taming is. Like, subscribe, check out my Patreon for exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos. Buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride. Check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave. And as always, thanks for listening everybody, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.